Additionally, we will be going live on Facebook for our global community around the world who may be preferring to engage in that way. So in just a moment, you will see that as well. And now you'll get a pop-up that we are going live. All right, folks. Again, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce my friend, my colleague, Michael Anderson. Michael Anderson's session today is called Selling the Negro, Teaching History of Black Media as Capitalist Pedagogy. Michael was born in Jamaica. He grew up in the Northeastern United States, the state of New Jersey to be specific. He studies and researches the history of Black education as a doctoral candidate at the University of California, Los Angeles. His work focuses on Black teachers, history, pedagogy, and ideology in general. Michael's work examines the political economy of education across race, class, ethnicity, citizenship, and gender. Michael also studies, writes, and teaches about critical media literacy and critical cultural studies in general. Michael strives to center collective movements, organizations, and individuals demanding a world beyond racial capitalism. Michael, it is my pleasure to dream with you today, my friend, and I'm so looking forward to this panel. I am now turning it over to you, Michael, and we're so happy to have you at the 4th Annual Critical Media Literacy Conference of the Americas.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you, Andrea. And yeah, it's just great to know you over these course of years. So, I'm going to just go right into it because there's a lot to say today. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Yeah, so hello, everybody. Good to be here. Always good to be able to speak the truth to folks. The title going into this talk is Selling the Negro, which we'll get into why. You'll see why later. The title is titled as such. Teaching the History of Black Commercial Media as Capitalist Pedagogy. My name is Michael Anderson, and yeah, this is going to be a little messy, a little rough. There's been some changes made, last minute, and I really want to say if there's any miscommunications, any non-smooth transition of ideas, please chalk that up to me. Don't chalk that up to the ideas that I'm trying to present today. So hopefully that this will be useful to educators across the world. So let's jump right into the first slide. Well, yeah, you will see why the people who are engaged here on this opening slide are important much later, as they are active producers of this myth that we're trying to bust today. But before we get into that, we have to address where we're at today. So I have my notes over here, so if I'm not looking directly at you, or if you're seeing me or you're seeing the slides, that's why. So what we're talking about today is a case study on a micro level of the state's ability to co-opt grassroots movements, culture, and language to the benefit of their capitalist imperialist interests. Okay, so it is a case study in pacifying a segment of a population to maintain oppression. Today, there is nothing more important right now than utilizing our skill set, and I'm sure multiple other panelists and contributors at this here conference have spoken on it. And if I'm the first, I don't believe that. But today, there is nothing more important than utilizing our skill set as media literacy educators to teach against imperialist hegemony. There is right now a push to manufacture consent for genocide in the Middle East. Yet again, disinformation is rampant, and the US president is aiding in this disinformation, as well as mainstream news media. In an aim, specifically related to this conference, in an aim to cut off Palestinian narrative resistance, Israeli forces have attacked one of the Palestinians' strongest weapons, which is their ability to produce media coming from Gaza. Israel has bombed all telecommunication centers, cutting off all cellular, landline, and internet communication to the outside world. The data centers, the networks, the servers, the cables have been destroyed. There is no communication. There is no media literacy to be had about information coming out of Gaza. There is no information coming out of Gaza. This is in addition to the cutting off of water, electricity, and food, letting only a few humanitarian aid trucks come to the aid of a population of 2.3 million people. They do this as they continue to bomb innocent civilians and steer them into deadly traps as the Palestinian people try to escape. We have to not operate as business as usual in all of our endeavors as we move forward. We say unequivocally that Israel is a settler colonial state and has been illegally occupying stolen Palestinian land since 1948, with the aid of the United Kingdom and the United States. I'm trying to slow down for translators, so I'm trying to be mindful of that.
You're doing great, Michael.
We say unequivocally that Palestine must be free, the bombs must be stopped, the killing must end, and the land must be returned. Solidarity with Palestine, no to the occupation. We say no to all colonial imperialist borders that harm, detain, and separate migrant families at the border here in the United States. We say no to US Army bases in Africa, the Caribbean, and South America through AFRICOM, CARICOM, and SOUTHCOM. We say no to continued sanctions on Cuba or unnecessary capitalist interventions in Haiti that President Biden is trying to force as we speak. And we say no to the anti-Black, anti-working class, anti-environmental construction of the $91 million militarized police training facility, otherwise known as Cop City in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. We say no to capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and imperialism. We free the land, free the people. So the flyer that you see on the screen is from a great organization in New York called the People's Forum. The People's Forum is a political education site in New York City and is a great resource for all things radical, international, and revolutionary. They will be hosting a talk specifically on the media war on Palestine on Tuesday, October 31st. And you can follow them on Instagram for the Zoom link and other information pertaining to the issues going on right now at People's Forum NYC. And it should be also on the screen as well. They're at. Just another example of the combination of the theme of this here conference and things going on today. This is an example of digital intelligence, artificial intelligence, and ideological warfare being waged on Gaza. And this is just the manifestation of what it looks like. This is the data journalist Mona Chalabi, who writes for The Guardian. She put into the artificial intelligence site ChatGPT asking, does Israel deserve justice? And the algorithm automatically was very clear about what needed to be done in terms of the response. But then in reaction to the question, do Palestinians deserve justice? The algorithm put out the response saying things are much more complicated. So that is an interesting example of everything that we're talking about today. But going in, I want to start with a quote from Malcolm X, going into our specific topic for today. He says, the media, this is not a divergent, this is the same topic, this is just a different case study of the same thing. The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent. And that's power. And we're going to be talking a lot about what power is and what it isn't. Because they control the minds of the masses. Now, next quote comes from the great Arundhati Roy, writer, journalist, novelist. There is really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard. Okay, I love this quote. And then we're going to jump over to the great Angela Davis, speaking on the limits of diversity and inclusion. This is another one of my favorite quotes. She says, diversity and inclusion is a corporate strategy. It is a strategy designed to ensure the institution or the state functions in the same way that it functioned before, except now that you have some black faces and brown faces, except now you have some black faces and brown faces. It is a difference that doesn't make a difference. So what are our goals for today? Our goals for today are as follows. We're going to, and this is you know, this is hefty. So we're going to try to unpack the myth of Black buying power and its political impact. We're going to look at some case studies of how that myth has been increased over the decades. And then we're going to talk about, if we have the time, I pray, teaching against the myth in K through 12 and community-based educational spaces. So let's jump right back to where we started. These are the same ideas that, you know, we're dealing with. So ideological warfare, counterinsurgency, neo-colonialism, manufacturing consent through Western media. This is not just these were already the themes of today, as I'm sure many of the themes that are going on throughout the conference. And just by the nature of being critically media literate, you know, it just so happens that it also responds to the issues going on in Gaza. So during the mid 20th century, after World War II, the United States government started funding something called communication studies to develop research that would further help project the ideological, economic, and political interests of commercial media, commercial and political elites, you know, after the war. What was their goal? What were they trying to do? Well, they were trying to develop a new type of American citizen, a new type of patriotism that, and this is really one of the largest concepts of the entire talk. During that historical moment, they were trying to equate citizenship with this idea of consumption, as well as equating democracy with free market capitalism and the idea of freedom with the ability to buy and sell alone, right? Really trying to define the terms of what it meant to be an American citizen. How did they go about doing that? As many as you all probably already know, it was to rebrand traditional propaganda. Propaganda at this time was not popular anymore because the Nazis were using propaganda to commit a Holocaust against the people. So the United States government had to figure out, how do we rebrand propaganda? So they recruited the likes of people you may know very well, the names like Edward Bernays and various other scholars, to change propaganda into terms that we are very familiar with now. Terms like public relations, marketing, and advertising. So this is important because we have to figure out, at this same time in American history, how is it that we include people into this free market and into this game of extraction that were once not excluded, specifically the Black community. Make sure. So like, yes, I'll just read the notes. So this talk is a case study of this nationwide process that continues today and how it has unfolded in a specific community, the Black community, and how it manifests in the digital commercial world. And so this is just a graphic, you know, just explaining what I just said, trying to link the green, having those colors match up. So media representation and inclusion becomes automatically linked with unnecessary exploitation and appropriation. Democracy is automatically connected with the free market, and this idea of citizenship and freedom and what that means to be civically engaged becomes directly tied with how much you can consume. So to frame our discussion about the Black community, we have two theoretical concepts that really help us get to the core of what we're talking about here, and that is predatory inclusion and the Black misleadership class. So predatory inclusion is a term that comes from Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, the great scholar of many books, one of them including Race for Profit. I'll just read off the screen. The concept of predatory inclusion also captures the failures of racial liberalism and its premise that inclusion into American democracy through the vehicles of citizenship, law, and the free market capitalism could finally produce fairness and equality towards Black citizens. So the formal and legal barriers to exclusion that we know of in the United States, like Jim Crow and racial discrimination, they were legally removed, but the ability to access was not and is not equal. And then the thing that you access, whether it's housing or education, once you have the ability to access it, is now worth less, but you still pay more for that thing, i.e. once women, Black people, Latinos come into higher education all of a sudden costs more, but the degree all of a sudden is now worth less, right? So a lot of value minus worth happening there. This is important because, as Dr. Ball, who we're going to introduce, and his work that we're going to frame this whole talk around, says new media strategies needed to be developed to manage what was also a moment of increased participation by Black people in the workforce, and in both a desire to be included in and to radically change the country's economic, political, and social landscape. So how do you get Black people to be included into the system, but also repress them at the same time? Which leads into our second point. You have to create a class of people who are willing to do that work. So the term Black misleadership class is a term that has been used in many places, and it can be traced back to more recent work, like the work of Olufemi Otaiwo in his book Elite Capture, and going back further to great legends like Glenn Ford and his journalism, and of course, E. Franklin Fraser's Black Bourgeoisie. So this quote that I've developed here is an amalgamation of a lot of works put together. So these are my words. These aren't a quote from somebody in particular. So the Black misleadership class, as we move forward, are elite Black people who hold relatively high levels of political, economic, and social capital. They wield their privilege and access towards getting the Black masses to aspire after their wealth and leisure, and to agree to the dominant patriarchal capitalist white supremacist status quo. Often they experience life separate from the working class and poor Black masses. Often they are opportunists who are sponsored by capitalists with investments in maintaining the status quo and the protection of their class interests. Okay. Other names for the Black misleadership class you may or may not be familiar with, for those on the global audience and those who are not Black people. They're called the Black middle class, the Black bourgeoisie. Some may know them as the talented 10th, the Black managerial class, the Black buffer class, neo-colonial leaders, the Cosbys. So this misleadership class is not particular to Black people. There is a white misleadership class. There is an Asian misleadership class, right? Whoever the people who are given the power to co-opt movements, who are given the power to water down the movements, whether that's a new state, a newly independent state and their fresh government, who are pledging their allegiance to capitalism and their former colonial powers, or whether it's a new class of people right after the civil rights movement who garner political power, but are not adhering to the material the needs of the people. So the myth of Black buying power and this idea that we can financially literate ourselves to freedom is very popular within the Black community. And it takes on multiple different manifestations in terms of slogans and aesthetics. One you see right here on the screen that everyone is probably familiar with in the United States, a term called Buy Black. It's rooted in a racist idea that unlike other races and ethnicities, Black people, due to a lack of financial literacy, squander their potential collective wealth. The idea appears cross-class, cross-ideology, cross time and space. So you'll see this idea come in right-wing spaces. You'll also see it come in left-wing spaces, but the logic is flawed nonetheless. It is a tool of social control that continuously changes with the times. So why are so many Black people in particularly who are the target of this myth, why are they so quick to join in on this logic? Black people are 14% of the United States population, but make up only 1% of the national wealth. This is a finance-centered myth, the myth of Black buying power. So it encourages a hope that seems like it can actually happen, despite its non-truth. It seems like it's a worthwhile endeavor and investment. And moreover, it's fatigue. People are attracted to a very simplistic answer at the end of a very long war, an economic warfare that is going on, and in relation to an ideological warfare. But as we continue the talk here, it is important not to blame the victims, but to keep our attention on those with the power who create the context for this myth to even spread. And that is where we get into the work of one Dr. Jared Ball. This is the book that we will be talking about extensively going into this talk and grounding our understanding of Black buying power. Dr. Jared Ball, he teaches over at Morgan State, which is an HBCU. For those of you not in the United States, HBCU stands for historically Black college or university. He is the host on a great media channel on YouTube called Black Power Media, and he has a specific podcast that is called I Mix What I Like. Based on the book by Steve Biko, which is I Write What I Like, the South African organizer and activist Steve Biko. That's it. Not too much on Professor Jared Ball, but let's get into what he says. So what is the myth of Black buying power? The idea of Black buying power suggests that a redirection of Black consumption habits can meaningfully overturn existing inequality, and that no other significant barriers to that overthrow exist. So this is looking at it in a vacuum, right? This is financial literacy without acknowledging colonialism, without acknowledging capitalism at all. Let's keep reading. The popular claim is that Black Americans spend more than $1 trillion annually, specifically, according to one report, 1.7 trillion in 2030, by 2030. So if you are Black and you are in the United States and you spend any time with Black people, this is a very popular number that you hear thrown around a lot, and it is very pervasive in the culture to hear this myth. Whether you are at a grocery store, whether you are in a college classroom. I personally came across this in an undergraduate course, but this is also the same logics that are poured out, just in regular non-academic spaces as well. It's a very prevalent myth within the community. So some assumptions that the myth relies upon. It relies on the idea that we are literally in a meritocratic state, and that capitalism works despite your race. Capitalism works not despite, but regardless of your race, your citizenship status, your class status. It says that working class people are generally financially illiterate, which is not true. Working class people are the most financially literate, but still the most exploited and extracted, right? And it assumes that buying power is a measure of Black wealth, as opposed to, as we will see much later, just spending capacity. It's just purchasing power, and we'll get into that right now, actually. So where does this myth come from? So the history of purchasing power as a concept comes out of this turn of the century, so the late 1800s, early 1900s cost of living reports, assessing the overall expenditures of various segments of society and determining how much communities were spending. So the labor movement at the turn of the century was like, hey, my standards are not, matching up with what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is saying. So we need a more accurate cost of living report, right? Moving forward. Buying power has its origins in government labor statistics, meant to help assess where wages should be set relative to inflation, but it is now today in 2023, mostly a phrase created and propagated by marketers in an attempt to assist the business community govern its advertising revenue. So it's really an assessment of how much money can we pull from a given population, whether that population is women, whether that population is immigrant, whether that population is Asian, whether that population is Black. It is not an empowering type of thing. It's really just what is the amount of purchasing power that a collective community has, and how much can we as a corporation, how much can we as a business extract from that community? It is not a measurement of the actual wealth of that community. That's not how this works, right? Dr. Ball goes on to say, power in the phrase Black buying power, and this is just what I just said, but in a more clear way, strictly means the power consumers have to buy one available product over another. Put another way, power in the phrase buying power means only the power to generate wealth for one corporation or another. So this is McDonald's trying to figure out how much money can we extract. This is Starbucks. This is Walmart, just trying to figure out how much money can they extract. This is what Black buying power is not. Black buying power is not an assessment of wealth, income, ownership. And this is what this is key, because this is what the myth relies on. It relies on people thinking it is wealth, it is income, it is ownership, right? And that if we just are more financially literate, then we can pool our wealth and things can happen, which ignores everything that I've said thus far and the history that I've laid out and that Dr. Ball lays out in his great book. So it is not wealth, it is not income ownership, which are the true indicators of economic strength. He goes on to say, buying power is not wealth. It cannot be invested at will and used to create more for its investors. Buying power is not stocks, bonds, or land, and it is not even real estate. It cannot be built upon, renovated, or flipped. Buying power is not income. It is not earned in exchange for labor, and it cannot be spent at will or used to pay for one bill versus another. Okay, so what does this myth look like in action? And this gets to our good friend Jay-Z. Oh no, the video is not available. It's fine. It's the quote that I have up on the screen is just example enough. So Jay-Z says, I'm just going to read my notes from here on forward. So this is an example of the myth being promoted coming from Jay-Z's song in 2017 called The Story of OJ. The song's title for non-American and non-Black people, I guess. The song's title pokes fun at O.J. Simpson. He was a famous football player at one point. And in the 90s, he had an extremely popular trial. We don't need to get into it. It pokes fun at O.J. Simpson, who has publicly denounced in, previous interviews that he's not Black, but he's O.J., right? So it's a play on that thing. So here, Jay-Z takes a very media literate approach to satire. So if you look up the video on Google after this talk, you will see that this is a mocking video. It's a satirical video that uses the elements that Disney and Warner Brothers have used of these very anti-Black tropes of neo-minstrelsy that you see in the creation of things like Mickey and Minnie Mouse, right? With the gloves on and things of that nature. So the video is amazing at depicting the historical elements of Black oppression, from housing discrimination, historic reminders of institutional state-supported racism, and the symbolic annihilation of Black people via Disney's racist cartoon caricatures of Black people. But everything goes wrong, and this is where the myth comes in, right? Everything goes wrong when Jay-Z's lyrics ultimately places the blame on Black people. We talked about blaming the victim. He places the blame on Black people for the continued oppression that they face, and not the culprits that induce this oppression, but Black people themselves. Specifically, the problem in Jay-Z's mind is financial ignorance and poor spending habits. Jay-Z literally calls his old mindset Dumbo, as you see in the quote, which is a play on words of the English phrase Dumbo, describing a non-intelligent person, and the Disney movie Dumbo, about a flying elephant. Dumbo here is also a place that's meant to describe a specific area in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, called Dumbo, which is an acronym for south of, I don't even remember. It's this various place in Brooklyn. It's now a gentrified place. And Jay-Z is basically trying to say, if he had invested earlier, he could have bought out this place and basically reap the wealth that comes from that real estate opportunity. So let's go further, because this is just an example. Takes a lot to explain the example, though. There we go. Hopefully it stays on this slide. The most terrible aspect of this example is not only the disparaging of Black people, but the abandonment and disparagement of the idea of Black political struggle as a viable alternative solution to oppression. Jay-Z has been on record mocking anti-capitalists and has said that being called a capitalist, which he said is a made-up term, which it is not, is on the same level as being called the N-word, which is, for international context, the N-word is one of the worst pejorative things you could call Black people in the United States. All of these remarks add up to pointing to financial literacy as the only kind of acceptable struggle or future planning that Black people should engage in under free market capitalism. This is a part of a long tradition of conservative Black business class, or the managerial class, or the neo-colonial class that we've talked about, placing Black capitalism and entrepreneurialism as the more viable option in response to more radical suggestions, which leads nicely to the next part of our talk. Oh boy. So many things have just dropped in my room, and this is totally fine. We are now back. All right, cool. So, all right, that worked out fine. And we did that one. No, we didn't. Okay, so how has Black commercial media figures sustain the myth? Okay. Let's just get fully set up again, and then we're back. So we're back to Dr. Ball, and he says this: what magnifies, and this is the media literacy part of our talk, what magnifies the impact of buying power, of the buying power claim, is that they are largely promoted by, and even the product of, a Black commercial press, who would transform the original concept, so that concept of a cost of living projection that are used by corporations into one designed to specifically target Black audience. And we'll speak about that further. So this is a two-pronged marketing formula. It is very, very sinister to develop to both sell an audience on the concept of Black buying power and sell that same Black audience to the largest white companies with the largest advertising budgets, right? And we are going to see different examples of this in the coming slides. He goes on to say, rather, the Black managerial class, the Black business class, rather than supporting calls from among Black political movements for radical distribution of an existing tremendous national wealth, i.e. more socialist endeavors, right? They have redefined what power means, and they've redefined it away from political power and redistribution of wealth towards consumption alone, right? So this is going back to that Jay-Z example, right? Financial power is my only hope. There's a pessimism about all other types of political organizing. Capitalism and reform under capitalism is the only idea, despite large traditions of Black anti-capitalist organizing, right? So what does this look like? Just to give a visual example of what's going on. I call it a triangle of deception, distraction, and extraction. So at the top there, you are seeing the Black managerial class, and they are doing a level of labor, and that is propaganda creation. That propaganda creation goes into creating the commercial product. So the example we just saw, that was Jay-Z's, the literal music video itself, right? And there is a level of ideological work that goes into the propaganda that thus creates a state of being and a relationship to economic critique that allows people to be open to white advertisers. So what they're trying to do is sell Black consumers to these wealthy corporations, right? So for example, I am Coca-Cola, and I put an ad in a very well-known Black magazine. The creator of that magazine is that Black managerial class. They are creating a very pro-Black aesthetic despite the ideology that can be converted into a lot of attention. That attention is then sold to white corporations, and then those corporations send the ad money back to the Black managerial class, and the cycle repeats over and over again. The most pernicious part, though, of this cycle is the propaganda creation, and that is what we're focused on here today, right? And there are three aspects that I want to talk about, which are attract, deceive, distract. So what's going on in the propaganda creation? So when I say attract, it means they're attracting white corporate or federal sponsors with potential Black consumers. They deceive by deceiving Black audiences with pro-Black aesthetics, pro-Black rhetoric, and representation. When Barack Obama comes into a room and he's dapping up everybody and he's being very Black, right? He's trying to get voters, right? And he's trying to create this very Black aesthetic. All of that to reduce Black civic engagement or activism to reform or consumption under modern capitalism. And then the worst part, the distraction, distracting Black political energy from more anti-capitalist or radical organizing options, while dismissing the necessity for radical organizing at all. It's just like, go get a job, don't join your tenants union or anything like that. Just bow your head and keep going. So I want to show some examples. So now we're moving on to the next stage this is the history portion of it. So these two individuals, Moss Kendricks and John H. Johnson, we're just going to breeze through them. We're not going to go into a deep dive or anything like that. But these two perfected the art of using their media talents and representational politics to sell Black consumers to white corporations. John H. Johnson, he created Jet magazine, he created Ebony magazine. Moss Kendricks created a very successful Black PR agency. And we're going to get into them. So it is important to note that while convincing Black people to feel a sense of racial justice from being represented, they were collecting them. They were collecting Black people and shipping them off to white advertisers. Okay. This is a little bit more about Moss Kendricks. So during the New Deal, he worked in the Division of Negro Affairs for the National Youth Administration, just basically using his media talents to get people to specifically Black people to buy into the New Deal. He was the public relations officer for the Republic of Liberia. So as the United States is trying to export this idea that the United States democracy should be connected to this idea of capitalism, and as a bunch of African countries, right? And this is where the neo-colonial part comes in. As a bunch of African countries are decolonizing and choosing a non-alignment route, so they're neither communist nor capitalist during the Cold War, the United States is using specific Black people like Moss Kendricks to attract not just individual consumers, but a whole state, a whole economy into the American way of thinking, right? More importantly, he becomes Coca-Cola's first special markets representative. So the original diversity and equity inclusion hire, and he's the one that basically makes it very popular to put a specific image of Black people as consumers into these Coca-Cola ads. So remember that triangle, right? The propaganda creation and then the selling the Black consumers, right? John H. Johnson, same formula, creating a thing, creating sort of a hype around the thing. Black people gather towards it. He takes that attention, sells that Black audience to a bunch of white corporate businesses, and they lead to his financial success. He said on wax, by on wax, I mean on record, he said on record that he was not into anything revolutionary or liberatory. He was a very milquetoast, centrist. He did not want to shave and ruffle any feathers. And while the Negro Digest, Ebony magazine, and Jet magazine were very useful, i.e., this was the format in which Emmett Till's story was able to come to the present of the United States consciousness, that doesn't undo the role that John H. Johnson he was trying to play. And nothing tells the story of this triangular extraction more than this video. This video doesn't play. Okay, that's fine. It's called look it up on YouTube. It's called The Secret of Selling the Negro. He's not even being like facetious, not facetious. He's not even trying to hide it at this point in 1954. In this video, it is an advertisement, not to Black people, but to white corporations about the Black purchasing power of 1954, right? And that there is a new market that they can exploit, right, now after the war, and that they shouldn't be afraid of marketing to Black people and basically exploiting their income because they have $15 million in worth or whatever collectively, and you should capitalize on that. And who does that benefit? That benefits people like Moss Kendricks, because it keeps their careers going. It benefits people like John H. Johnson. So what does that look like? That's the history. What does that look like today? Let's see here. What's it look like today, folks? All right. So today it looks like sponsorships on the social media realm. we have to remember this idea of predatory inclusion. So everything, all of these examples are examples of you're being included, but it's coming at a cost, right? Or it's coming at the benefit of somebody else. And remember this idea of the misleadership class as well. So it's not just the private sector corporations, but the wealthy political elites who are also today in 2023 buying Black consumers and buying Black approval from Black influencers who we can include in this Black managerial class now, because the triangle, that relationship that I displayed further, the relationship is still the same, it's just the things are different. The attract, deceive, distract model is still utilized, except now on the digital field. How am I doing with time?
You're doing great, Michael, but we have just a few minutes before session ends. If you feel like you have time to accept questions, we could take a couple, or if you want to wrap up your ideas, I'm sure the audience wants to share too with you, but feel free. You got a couple minutes.
Okay, so in that case, I'm going to skip over all those examples, and then I'm going to go to These are just modern examples of the same thing. You all get it. You all get it by now. So how do we teach against it? I lead with this idea of class suicide, this idea you have to reject. It's coming from Amilcar Cabral. He was a West African revolutionary in the 60s, and he's saying that we need to reject the temptations of becoming more bourgeois and just not be opportunists in general. Everybody definitely look into Cabral and his work. Classroom activities, as critical media literate educators, I think one of the best things we can do is apply critical media literacy tools to attack the myth. So one tool that we can use is using film. So critical anti-capitalist film analysis, looking at films like The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith and Lean on Me. These are just very US-based examples, but you can use other ones, comparing them, asking the students very specific questions, like the ones that you see on the screens. What were the economic policies that impacted the time and the period of the film? You know, why did the film come out at this time? We can talk about it later. Class reflections, prompts and discussions. Basically, how does the myth manifest in your life? What are your goals for your life? And how might some contradictions arise under capitalism for you to meet those same goals and to have the same quality of life that you expect environmentally, socially, individually? And this is a whole thing. I don't have the time to explain it, but it's like a mock capitalism situation where the teacher pretends to be a corporation and then slowly increases the prices of everything in the class, and then have the students think about how can they challenge it and what are the other ways that they can go about organizing themselves. And these are just other resources of people doing things well in media that I highly suggest that we talk about. But yeah, any questions?
Thank you, Michael. Oh my God, Michael, you gave us so much today and more. This, I hope, will continue. I'm wondering, we have about time for one question for Michael Anderson before we need to close the room to prepare, or one comment. Jane, I do see you in the crowd. I see excellent presentation. If anybody would like to offer a remark or question for Michael, really quick, and then we will close it out.
Thank y'all.
Hold on one second. We see excellent presentation. Yes, Michael. Well, due to time, I do want to encourage folks to please visit the resources that were dropped in the chat. Michael, we hope that others will come and engage further with your many resources. I encourage you specifically to follow Michael Anderson History Class with Michael, History of Black Studies on YouTube, Instagram, Find Your Rhythm, do not miss these events that have also been dropped in the chat. The People's Forum, New York City, people doing it and doing it well. Michael, there's much left to reflect on. I want to thank you for these offerings. I think this needs to be a series, my friend. I encourage you. I hope we can speak more on these things. And I want to thank you for sharing this wisdom with us today and lots more we can reflect on. Thank you so much. And to our audience, and we'll look forward to welcoming you on back for the next session. Thank you, everyone. And Donna and company, if you wouldn't mind staying. Michael, it was a privilege, a pleasure. Thank you so much.